All right, welcome back to Inside BBI with John and Eric. Of course, John McDevitt, and along with me, senior editor of Big Blue Interactive, Mr. Eric Kenny. Eric, we had talked in an earlier video. We went over some questions. We went over some of the changes in the roster recently, injuries, and all that good stuff. Let's focus now on the go forward this week. We've got the Jets coming up, which means not only the game, but we have the joint practice pieces. So let's start there. The Jets week. Let's start with that.
Yeah, and then people will recognize the picture behind me here. It's the Jets always have to roll out Joe Namath because they're such a loser of a franchise that they have to keep bringing this
Nice.
guy out. This drunk who likes to wear women's pantyhose. Anyways,
Nice. Woo.
yeah, no, it's a big week. I'm giving grief to my Jets friends out there. The It's a big week, not just because of the game, but it might be more important because of the one practice. Unlike when we practiced against Detroit, it was 2 days. This is going to be one day, so it'll be condensed. My sense is this is going to be probably the last real physical practice. And I don't know this for a fact, but this is going to be the last real physical practice. And of course, real physical game before we get the cuts, and then things are going to be in regular season mode. So I think this is going to be a really important week, and this is the last week that we really have to kind of cross our fingers with injuries too, because every Giants and Jets fan out there knows there's a bit of a hex on both teams when these two teams play in the preseason, and we just got to sort of cross our fingers that neither one of us lose somebody very significant in this game.
Yeah, the interesting thing with, and don't hold me to this every single time, but lots of times when the Giants and Jets would play, it was either the second or the third game when we had a 4-game preseason.
Yes.
And the
Yep.
fourth game,
It was
lots of
the
times
third. It
ended,
was usually the
yeah,
third in the
yeah,
four
which was
game. Yeah.
always the more competitive, more physical game back in the day. That's where you play your starters. And then game four, we played like lots of times it was the Patriots we ended up playing at the end. So I'm not so sure what the Jets are going to roll out there. And I think you're right. I think the one practice is going to be the big deal. That's going to be where where the physicality piece comes in, where maybe some of the animosity comes in. And I've always worry when they practice with each other, but I don't know so much this year with the Jets. Without the hard knocks piece, we haven't seen a lot. We haven't heard a lot. They don't appear to be in any kind of hurry to play Aaron Rodgers, so I doubt we see him in the game. So in practice, they might try to keep it. Overall, from the practice piece, we are talking one game, one practice. I mean, one scrimmage. What are you expecting the Giants to do? What are they trying to work on in that one practice? And does it change whatever they're working on there? Change your perspective on what they might do as far as the actual game goes?
Yeah, I think that, people were questioning today, why doesn't Dable know, or why doesn't he commit to playing the starters in the game? And I think that will depend on what is accomplished or not accomplished in the practice. So ideally, they would like to have two practices, but we're so late in camp and the injuries are mounting. So in a way, if we had two practices right now, I'd be a little bit leery right now. Again, nothing major, but we talked about in the previous video, we're kind of running out of inside linebackers right now. So I think who plays and what they want to accomplish really depends on practice, on in the joint practice. And if Dable feels they didn't get something done, then they're going to play the starters. And I also think injuries tie into that. So if they come out of the joint practice and they're in pretty good physical shape, I think he's more likely to play. Whereas, if Neighbors or Wandale Robinson or an offensive lineman get dinged up, he might just say, you know what, it's not worth it. We're going to pull back a little bit. So I think, again, it's a non-answer, but I think it's a smart answer and I would do the same thing if I was in his shoes. I would make my decision based on what happens in that practice.
So when you say what happens in that practice, let's be more specific.
Right.
What happens, we don't get injuries, or what happens, Jones struggles to get any
Both.
kind of consistency? Okay, so
Both.
we are talking both.
Both,
Because
because I think if Jones and the offense look really bad in the joint practice, I think that's not going to sit well with Dable. But again, if somebody gets banged up, like again, John Runyon's hasn't been practicing. They're not going to play him in the practice. They're not going to
correct.
practice him with the shoulder. They're just not going to do that. If they came out of the game, or if they came out of that practice where Illuminor's got a minor injury, but it's something that could keep him out of practice, he may say, you know what, I don't want to roll out my first team offensive line at this
Period.
point,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So it's both. So that's why, and I think it's a smart answer. I would be the same, and you hear this sometimes with coaches in the past where they've said, we got so much done in the practice that we really don't need to do what we might have done in the game. So
Right.
and I don't think that's just the Giants thing. I think that's a league wide thing.
I will be I will be disappointed if we roll out the first team in the game and the Jets don't. And we're using that as some sort of like participation confidence award for Daniel Jones to play their twos, especially even more so if we were to struggle with their twos. I think that would be the nail in the coffin kind of deal. I really, if the Jets are going to play, then I think we play. If the Jets aren't going to play, and I wonder if that's a conversation they'll have during the week. If the Jets aren't going to play their starters, maybe we don't play ours. I don't want false confidence for Jones playing against the twos because it doesn't carry over. That doesn't mean anything when we go to play a team playing their ones. So I guess I'm kind of, we talked about it before. I was kind of for it, except for the fact that he did look so bad that I kind of want to just be like, let's just not risk looking bad or taking anything bad from that game and have it be carried over even further.
Right.
But at some point you play. So
But remember, they played Houston and they kept Jones in the first team in the game when the Houston brought their backups in because Jones looked in the
correct.
say the offense, it was Jones. Jones looked bad and they wanted to get him some positive feeling coming out of that game. And they did, but people are like, oh, look at the great throw to Slayton. And it was a great throw to Slayton. But as you said in a previous video, and you just said it again right now, it's disingenuous to say you had success against lesser competition. In the corner, Slayton beat was way down on their depth chart, and the pass rushers weren't in the game. So I agree with you, but I also can see the coaches saying they don't care. They need to get Jones the work. So it'll be interesting. It'll be
Yeah.
interesting. Again, injuries tie into this. How they do in the practice ties into this. So if it's a good back and forth in practice, I'm leaning against them playing them more than a series or two. If the Jets just dominate the practice, I could see Dable saying, no, we got, I don't care if you're playing against the backups. You need to get your act together and we're going to practice. You need practice. I don't care if it's against their backups. You guys, and in almost a way, it would be punishment in a way. It would be like,
Yeah, right.
you did it to yourselves. You'd be standing on the sidelines instead of risking injury at this point because you guys couldn't get it done in the practice. So they've got to get ready, in my mind. So the answer will come, I think, and I think again, Dable basically said so. It's going to depend on how they do in the practice.
It was a different world, and I'm trying to remember if it was exactly 1987, but I believe it was. The Giants coming off the Super Bowl win in 86 struggled in camp. They were not playing well, and Parcells was pissed at the way that they were playing in the fourth preseason game and left the starters in to play into the second half. Phil Simms has talked about this, and that was his way of teaching them a lesson of being like, obviously it didn't equate to anything. We finished, I think it was 6-9-1 in 87 because of the strike. But again, you can see different mindsets. It was a different time. I wonder though, if we know the Jets are not gonna, and we can move on to different pieces of but if we know the Jets are not gonna play their ones, guys who are playing in this game, some of them are desperate to be in the league. And that can tend to lead to over exuberance, a little bit of a little extra. And do
Yeah.
you want to expose your quarterback who's coming off a knee to guys who are desperately trying to make a name for themselves? That might come into play too. So we'll see. You're right. I think the one practice, the hatred between the two teams, I don't know if it's there this year as much as it's been in the past. So we'll see. But looking at it elsewhere, we know we talked about this there's injuries across the team. So I'm going to pull a question in that was posted that'll tie into what we're talking about. So beyond the quarterback position, what position group are you most concerned about, like injury and talent wise right now? And again, using this game as part of the barometer, is there an area of our team where we're like, geez, I don't know who we're actually going to be able to put out there based on where we're at? And I think I know your answer right off.
Yeah, and wasn't the question also a two-parter? What parts of the team do you feel good about? Was it a two-parter or was that another one? I could have sworn.
Yeah, the other part of it was give me a group that you're least concerned about.
Okay, so I'm going to tie these two together because I was thinking about this earlier before we got on. So this shows you where I am with the quarterback situation. Contrary to previous years, and I'm going to move on both sides of the ball. So I'm going to start off with the offense. This is the first time in memory that I feel pretty good about the offensive line. I really
Yep.
do. Now, we have not been playing against starters. I mean, when we played Houston last week, they had their best pass rushers out of the game. So again, I expect some growing pains, but I really like our tackles. I think Andrew Thomas is as good as it gets in the league right now, and I think Illuminor is a rock solid tackle. He'll get beat sometimes, but I think he's rock solid. I think our guards are night and day better than what they've been, and I think the real question is how long is it going to take Schmitz to get sort of caught up to speed, and because he's missed so much time. I like our offensive line. I really like our wide receivers. I like our running backs. I really do. Now that we know Tracy's going to be okay, and this gets into another question too that someone posted. How do you see the running backs? I think that's a fascinating question. This coaching staff, while they've been here, has given almost all the carries to Saquon Barkley. Breida hardly touched the ball at all, and nobody
Right.
really touched the ball after him. I mean, they occasionally would give Brightwell a carry or two, but that was it. I think this is going to be really different this year. I don't know, but I think it's really because I think Tracy and Eric Gray are going to force their hand a little bit here. So I think they're going to play all three of those backs. But what I'm saying, trying to get at with on offense is I think, and I want to finish with the tight ends. I think they've got a complementary group that's not going to be. They're going to be better at the end of the year than they are starting, and that's going to be mainly because of Theo Johnson's growing curve, his learning curve here. I think he's tight ends take a while, and he's not going to the player he's going to be a year from now is not going to be the player he is now. He's going to be a much better player. But I like our offense. The position that worries me on offense is quarterback. It's the
Right.
quarterback worries me more than everything else. And I can't believe I'm saying this because this is a team that we've had a mess on the offensive line forever. But almost overnight, I feel much better about our offensive line, and I love our wide receivers. And I like our running backs. I just went through them all. So before we move to the other side of the ball, I'd get your input on this. But right now, on the offensive side, it's the quarterback to me.
Yeah, first off, I'm 1,000% with you. The part of the team that I'm right at the moment the least concerned about is the offensive line, which is amazing to say, because not only is it night and day better, we still haven't even seen the full five starters play together yet, and we are seeing cohesion. We talked about it. You brought it up. We talked about it together lots of times in the past when we would see the second and third teams of the Giants. In reality, we were third team, fourth team, or just guys that were there playing because we were so thin already up front that the backups were guys that were probably marginal at best NFL players. And then once you got to the third string, these were guys that any other team, they're getting cut no matter what. That's how bad it was. And it was even when we would pull, I mean, we pulled Justin Pugh off the couch. He used to be called Justin Puny because his arms were short. Now he was Justin Puny because he was thin, and we threw him in at guard as with no, and he was still one of the better offensive linemen that we had, which was how bad that was last year. This
And he's
team,
still sitting on a couch right now, and so
yeah,
is Glowinski. They're not even on the 90-man roster in camp right now. And
exactly,
you know,
exactly. So right now, I think we're so veteran laden team on the offensive line, interchangeable, that a guy that we thought we would have to absolutely count on in Evan Neal hasn't even shown a thing yet. We have no idea what we're going to have with this guy, and we're comfortable where we're at as long as he can develop even just being a backup. We're
well,
okay for this year.
And that's what one of the things that you said is key is this is an extremely young team, but most of the veterans are on the offensive line right now.
Right.
So it's a
Right.
veteran group, and that's one of those areas that you actually kind of want to have veterans at, unless you have really young, kick-ass young players. But the veteran, I mean, so much of playing an offensive line is just not screwing up, and it's physical too. You don't you got to run block and you got to pass block, but you also have to be in the right position, and I feel great about that. Now moving to the defensive side of the ball, believe it or not, even though I think that's going to be maybe the stronger part of the team based just again because of the quarterback, that's where most of my concerns are right now. So I'm still worried about, as is most people, about that other cornerback
Yep.
spot. We had a bunch of questions in the thread on what are the Giants going to do at cornerback, who's going to be the cornerback. Do you think the cornerback is on the roster? No, I don't. I don't think the cornerback is on the
Agreed.
roster. I was hoping coming into camp that Flott or Trey Hawkins would nail it down. The fact that they've got to move McLeod back out there, who's not an ideal guy, but he may be the best of the bunch, tells me it's like what Cy said the other day. He said their actions basically tell you they don't, and they know it that they don't. So I don't think our starting corner is on the roster right now. Can they survive if they didn't bring somebody else in? Yes, but I don't think I think it would be a problem. Part of the issue here too is Flott has missed almost 2 weeks now. I think it's almost 2 weeks, but he hasn't played
Definitely.
a
Definitely.
while now, and that really it's hurt his learning curve here too because Jerome Henderson, the defensive back coach, said he was just starting to show some signs, and then he got hurt. And and Trey Hawkins played well in the first game, and I thought he took a major step back in the second game. And some of these guys may not have a roster spot if they're not careful. So I don't. Corner's the one, and the other is that defensive three technique spot where Elijah Chapman's making noise, and I hope he's not just this flash in the pan, but they are a little thin on the defensive line in that spot. I don't worry about the big guys so much, but I worry about getting that other guy that can get it after the quarterback because I don't really see them doing this thing where some people have talked about putting Aziz and Ojulari and Burns on the field together. I don't think they're going to because they haven't been doing that in practice and they haven't been doing that in games. I really don't think they're going to be doing that. So it's that defensive line spot and it's that corner spot. And in the short term, it's inside linebacker because we don't know when Micah McFadden's going to get back.
So the second corner, I fully agree with you. I don't necessarily think he's on the team at the moment. Whether that means a higher end vet name who got released, or we make a trade, or we pick up a mid tier guy, that we just add to the mix that we already have. I don't know yet. I do think they're going to do something somewhere with somebody, and I do believe it's going to be on the defensive side. I don't think we're going receiver. I don't think we're going running back. Although I mentioned it before, I think we're gonna ride with what we've got at the running back position. I think it's either defensive back or possibly another edge or that third, if you want to call it the third defensive lineman, the other guy playing opposite on the other side of you've got Tibbs playing stand up on one side, Lawrence, we've gotten Noches in the middle. Who's the other defensive lineman right now? We got a bunch of guys that are kind of all the same, and none of them really stand out. And we should talk about that in a second. So it depends on where they go. But I think corner, I think you and I both kind of think corner is where they're going to go because they've talked about it so much. It was so well known because of Hard Knocks. The Houston announcers talked about it constantly when they would show Lassiter on the sidelines for Houston and how badly the Giants wanted to get him in the draft and didn't. And
Right.
so corner is such a need. I can't imagine we're going to go. Darnay Holmes to me, I think the way he plays, do they keep him around? Maybe, but he's a guy that we know he is who he is. And do they run with another, a veteran who's going to get a lot of holding penalties but cost more, or just take maybe a younger guy who's going to get a lot of holding penalties but cost less?
Yeah, and you mentioned a really important thing. They are okay at edge as long as Kayvon and Burns don't get hurt. If
Right.
one of them get hurt, we're in deep trouble at that position. And so it's why this team still has some significant needs going into next year's draft, because we've talked about quarterback. We spent too much time on it in the last video, so we won't do it again here. But they'll need a quarterback. How they get it in free agency or the draft, we'll have to see. But they need that corner, and we know they want corner because of what they did in Hard Knocks. And you can just look at the team. But they also, I really think they want that three technique. They've got Nunez Roches is going to be the starter with Dexter Lawrence, and he can hold down the fort, but he's not going to be a pass rush guy. Hopefully, again, Elijah Chapman comes in and gives some juice there, but they don't have that one scary guy to put next to Dexter. The other thing is this depth behind edge. If unless Ojulari comes on like gangbusters, if one of those two go down, it's a bad situation because right now you're looking at, when I watched the Houston game, it was noticeable when our two guys were out of the game. Boogie's Boogie. He's not going to scare anybody.
Right.
Ojulari isn't. I don't. He's kind of fallen off a cliff. And then the one guy Cy was talking about was the Benton Whitley a little bit, but I don't think you can count on a Benton Whitley to be your backup. Maybe he might make the team and maybe will surprise us. I don't know, but I think going into waiver time when they do the cuts is the 27th on next Tuesday. They're looking at corner, they're looking at edge, and they're looking at defensive tackle on the waiver wire. I really do. I think so. So even though I expect the defense actually to be decent this year, it's interesting that I think you can scheme around defensive weaknesses a little bit, and especially if you play zone coverage. But those are the areas where I'm really going to be looking for the waiver wire pickups more so than on the offensive side of the ball.
It's funny when you look at the team in general, offense and defense. We're pretty good, and when I say up front, I'm going to use the line of scrimmage overall, not just the linemen, but people playing on the line or affecting the line or moving off the line, and then the back end. So the back end of the defense, the secondary, our safeties we thought were pretty good and deep. With injury now, we're not as deep at the moment early in the season. I think we'll be okay as it goes along. Corner, we're definitely not, because we've got a bunch of guys. As we just talked about, there could be 4 or 5 guys that play in the game. 2 of them could be starting that game that might not even be on the team when we finish, after we go through cuts and other people get released. It's that kind of weird at corner right at the moment. And on the offensive side, you've got the line, we've got our tight ends, we've got our receivers, everybody there. Our backs, we think we're good. Our quarterback is just like cornerback. We have guys, we just don't know whether or not they're good enough to play.
At the
That's
most
a
important
scary thing.
position on the team too. You can't scheme around quarterback too
Yeah.
much,
Yeah, you can
So
minimize, and I think that's
yeah,
what we're going to try to do. One of the questions that came up, and I'm actually going to combine it. So Sims 11 was asking a number of questions on cornerback 2. Sorry, I'm looking at the questions over here.
there
Cornerback
was one
2,
on special teams too at the
edge,
top.
edge
Yeah,
depth. Well, he's asking the same thing, and he's like, and he's also not talked about enough is the special teams. Is this year that our special teams wins us a game or two? One of the things to keep in mind, and this came up in a and I can't remember who said it. I believe it might have been the Lions broadcast team during the Lions Giants game, how special teams have changed. With the way you're doing kickoffs now, you're going to see far more defensive backs, wide receivers, linebackers, where in the past there were a number of offensive linemen, defensive linemen that played on special teams. They would take on the big blocking assignments up front, of the guys who would bust the wedge. All that's kind of changed. You're going with smaller groups now. So a lot of our special teams are going to be made up of these other positions. So your thoughts on the special teams, how much is that going to play a role in who makes this team at the back end of wide receiver, at the back end of defensive back?
yeah, we've talked about this one a lot, except we haven't talked about one of the most important players I think on this team. So one of the questions that stood out to me is who's the best special teams player on the team, and my mind immediately drifted because I've been touting him for a while now is Miles Boykin. But then I thought, no, the best special teams player and somebody who has historically been one of the best special teams player in Giants history is still Graham Gano. He really is. So one of the big questions is does he come rebound from the injury season he had last year, which was his worst here. But if you look at what he did in his previous years and with the Giants, he is one of, you could argue that he is one of the best kickers easily that this team has ever had in their history in terms of the percentage of the kicks and especially the distance kicks. So I hope he rebounds because Graham Gano, I would argue that in the last few years, Graham Gano has been the best player on this team. People will say Dexter Lawrence. Dexter Lawrence has been the best player for a couple of years now, but going back more years, Graham Gano is actually year in and year out has been because Graham Gano, he was Mr. Automatic, and it was if you needed a 53-yard kick, he would hit it. So I like the kicker. The punter is going to be interesting because he's been getting better, but I didn't think he did play particularly well in the last preseason game, but he's been becoming more consistent. I like our gunners this year, depending on who else we keep. That's where Darnay Holmes may actually make it if he does make the team because he's been catching my eye with the gunner. And there are a number of guys that we have brought in free agency in the draft that were known as special teams guys. Adams, inside linebacker, Muasawa, inside linebacker, for instance, a number of the defensive backs. That's gets to what you were talking about in terms of moving to these smaller guys. So I think to answer the question, if he's back to his old form, Graham Gano's their best special teams player, and I do really like Miles Boykin. I love gunners on punts that can change a game, and I think he's one of those guys that can change a game.
You're gonna hate me on this one.
Huh.
I'm with you on the Miles Boykin.
You don't agree with me on Graham Gano?
I don't, only for this one reason. Everything you said about it is true, but we have been a losing team. We have not been a team that is Matt Barr. Sorry, not Chris Barr. Matt Barr. We're not a team that's Matt Barr away from clutch kick Super Bowls. We haven't been winning games. We have an expensive kicker. We are paying a decent amount of money for a kicker. I'd rather right now with this team trying to get better that we didn't give him that bigger contract and then extend that contract, redo that contract a little bit to free up space. I think we did it last year. And still, what are we, 5-6 million for a kicker? And I know that doesn't sound like a lot when you're talking about all these other things, but in reality it is. That's the only negative I have on Graham Gano. All the stuff you said about his play is absolutely true. The problem is that I feel like we're overpaying for a kicker when we weren't a kicker away from what we were doing.
I think if you don't have a kicker, you lose football games. I've seen enough Giants games where the kicker has been one way or the other has just determined the game one, and I just don't want to worry about that. It's like no one ever worried about the long snapper until the playoff game.
Don't bring that up.
So I don't want to worry about the long snapper, and I don't want to worry about the kicker. Yeah. There's something comforting to me to know that when you send your kicker out on the field, he's going to hit the kick. He's going to get the kick. And that's why I knew the mojo was off last year. It was the blocked kick that got Andrew Thomas injured and all that. But then Graham Gano got hurt, and it was like you could just see this whole thing kind of spiraling out of control. So I think Graham Gano, up until last year when again he got hurt, I think he's been criminally underrated by a lot of fans because if you look at the great kickers in Giants history, he's up there. I mean, he really is over an extended period of time too. So that's why I hope he gets back to where he was, because to me he's like Matt Barr with a better leg right now. And I know what you're getting at, but I still think this is a team that can compete. If the quarterback plays decently, I think this is a team that can compete for a playoff spot. I really do. And the kicker's got to be able to kick those. And I don't worry too much if you're paying a few more $1 million a year for it. I understand where you're coming from, but I'd rather give the kicker that money than the fourth wide receiver or something like that. That's where you and I will disagree on that.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying about the play, and I'm focused on the salary piece and whatever. But so let's stick with special teams for a second and stick with the return. We talked about this in a previous video. Gunner the player being hurt is probably cementing that he's not going to make this team. And Isaiah McKenzie is at this point looks like he's not only going to be a slot receiver, which it looks like he will be playing quite a bit on offense as well, but he's going to be the main kick and punt returner. Are you comfortable with that, or are we possibly looking elsewhere for a guy who's a full on kick returner?
I think we should not discount the possibility that the Giants will do the unexpected at this point. The one thing that's been clear is if you get hurt and you're not one of the players, you're not safe on this roster. They've been cutting players who've been getting hurt. Ryder Anderson's the latest. So Gunner's in that category right now that he, unfortunately for him, he's kind of probably taken himself out of the equation, and they could probably again um, cut him and bring him back at some point if they really needed to do so. I think we've talked about this before. I think there's a comfort level with Isaiah McKenzie with Dayball and his
Yes.
background. So I think, and he knows his offense, and I just think that the combination of his ability to return punts, plus if something happened to Wandale, that gives them an insurance policy. That being said, Isaiah's decent returner, but he's nothing to write home about. You know, if fumbling ever became an issue with him, I could see them make a move there too. But right now, I expect Isaiah to make the team, Gunner to be gone, and I think Gunner kind of took himself out of the equation there.
So, and I have absolutely no inside information when I go to say this, but there's something I've read a couple of different things. It's a little weird when I read it. So Buffalo has a lot of injuries right now. Buffalo has injuries in a number of different spots. Buffalo has injuries at their backup quarterback spot. They had to go pull somebody. I can't even remember who it was. They pulled them off the. It was Ben DiNucci. They pulled him out. So they're just basically just trying to get by because Trubisky's hurt. They have injuries at wide receiver, and a decent drop off in talent where they have been the last few years at wide receiver. I would not be shocked if Buffalo was trying to interested in maybe getting McKenzie back, who knows their offense. But that's not the big thing though. There's been kind of rumors kind of floating that they're not overly thrilled with the development of Rousseau and that he is coming up on a contract piece and could be had. And I'm wondering if we might tap into that connection to Buffalo to see about getting Rousseau, which you're banking on that he's going to develop. Um, and or if it's not, then there's also the possibility that they might want one of our wide receivers, knowing that connection is there. But I think the Buffalo's a team to watch for as far as us adding somebody on either side of the ball because they have needs as well, and we have the needs. Now, I've said it more than once. I know, and other people on the site and even in the questions, they're not for it. I get it. I'm not advocating that we just go and dump Darius Slayton. But if the Giants need something, there are teams out there that need a guy. Darius Slayton is easily that guy. You put Darius Slayton on Kansas City and you pair him out there with Mahomes and a couple of their other receivers, they are very dangerous. They had Marquez Valdez-Scantling last year as one of their receivers. Slayton's far and above that guy. They need another receiver. They're going to have suspensions at wide receiver. I'm just saying he's a tradable asset. So when we look at receiver, if we think McKenzie's the returner and he plays offense, that's our fifth wide receiver. Boykin is six. Do we go seven?
I've wondered about that. I don't think so, and the only reason is because we've talked about three quarterbacks, we've talked about maybe four tight ends, we've talked about maybe four running backs. They get some spot. You're gonna have to find that somebody's gonna lose out here, and I just don't see. If we had another wide receiver on the roster who is lighting it up in camp, I think it would be more difficult. But we're not seeing somebody like a Bryce Ford Wheaton lighting it up. We're not seeing somebody like Hodgins lighting it up. I just don't, or an Allen Robinson. I just don't see it where why would you get rid of somebody else right now for that? Again, so if there was somebody there that I was like really pining for, I would say yes, but I don't know. The only thing I'll say is this: is you and I have probably have done I don't know, 10 videos already, and 8 of them you've talked about getting rid of Slayton. I'm not gonna bring that up. But
It's
there
true.
is a question on from MS on Slayton on what do you think we would get for him? So he's talking about a draft pick. So I think if we were to trade Slayton, I think it would probably be kind of what you were thinking about, a player for player deal, even though those are rare. But if they were going to trade him, what do you think they would get for Slayton? It, I don't see them getting a second round draft
So
pick for him.
I
Would
think
you? I
it,
mean,
I think it kind of really depends on the when. If you were to do it now, it's not as much because there's going to be other receivers getting cut, and so teams aren't going to be. I'm not going to give you a ton. I'll give you
right.
some. So if it's before the trade deadline, so let's let's play.
Chiefs, like you
Yeah,
said, if the Chiefs
Chiefs
needed
right
some.
there. Use you.
And a late round pick for I mean a late second rounder or third rounder for them is different than another team.
Exactly. And if
Yeah.
you think you're good, if you think you've got all this stuff and you need another receiver to really take it over the top, then yeah, then I definitely think that you're looking at at least a third, maybe bottom second, or maybe it's a 3 and a 5 in the next draft. So you're getting kind of 2 picks, conditional picks, because it depends on what he does too. Like if he's putting up decent stats and he's showing stuff here, but we're out of it and we're looking to trade. Because again, we're going to need ammunition if we want a quarterback. It's either going
Right.
to be in free agents, as you said,
Yeah.
or it's in the draft.
Oh, not only that, but we've talked about these other positions we need. We need a corner, we need a defensive lineman, we need another edge. So they're going to need assets. The other thing I will say that supports your claim with that too is I think Slayton. I agree with Cy. I think we've gone from Slayton being overrated to Slayton being underrated, and he said that in the last video, and I
Yeah,
agree with him. I think fans have gone from one extreme to the other with him. And I think Slayton cut down on those drops last year. And I think he's become a more reliable receiver. And you put Darius Slayton with a Patrick Mahomes, he's a different player maybe. So
right.
so
What's your
when they win and if they do trade him, I know you're going to do victory laps. I do, but
no,
what's
no, no.
interesting
I'm
today
not
was
cheering for him to
this.
be traded.
What
I
was
just
interesting today is they Pat Leonard said Slayton was getting more of the first team reps over Hyatt. So we'll see. We'll see.
that's a dangerous sign if that were to continue well into the season. It means they're not as happy with Hyatt's route running ability and picking up the other nuances because we know he can run fast down the field. It's
The
the other
coaches have
stuff.
said, and I know coach speak, the coaches have been gone out of their way this offseason saying how pleased they are with his work ethic. So I don't think it's that. I think it just there's a learning curve here. I really do. I don't think it's a matter of want to or it's just he may not be developing as quickly as they want. And again, I'm not still saying
Is
that's
it
the
is
case.
that a is that a
One day doesn't make a trend. We've
is
seen days where somebody gets first team reps and it doesn't mean anything.
sure.
So
Is that
Darius made a play, so maybe we're rewarding him too.
is that a borderline backhanded compliment about talking about his work ethic? Is it almost like, hey, we're not displeased with how much effort he's putting in? I mean, I mean,
No,
sometimes you say things.
they've been saying things like, "I can't believe how hard he's working in to improve his body and getting stronger. He spends extra time with me in to learn the position." I mean, the coaches have been coming. They haven't been asked about it. They've been bringing it up themselves,
Do you
saying,
do you do you think they're trying to build his confidence up? Is
"No,
it?
no, no. I think they're pleased with his. I think I think they're pleased with I think they're pleased with his work ethic. I just think they're pleased with the guy. There are a lot of players out there, and the one that immediately comes to mind is Eric Flowers. There are guys out there with talent and who just don't even apply themselves. That don't even,
Right, right.
they don't try to get better or they don't think they need to get better. He knows he needs to get better and he's putting in the time. So what I always look for when I look at players, work ethic, one of the things I sort of catches my attention is when when we find out that players are spending extra time with coaches or other players to get better. In other words, they're going above and beyond what they're required to do. And I don't think I think that happens less frequently than people would like to think. And I'm a big Jalen Hyatt guy, so I put my neck out on
Sure.
it. So it's going to sound like I'm sticking up for him, and in a way I am. But but I'm just bringing up the fact that because Darius did get more reps today with the first team, that seems to also suggest that he has value still to the Giants as well too. However, if they're out of the Giants are not in the playoff contention, then like you said, they need tradable assets, and he sticks out like a sore thumb.
So, sticking real quick with the wide receivers, we'll hit a couple other things, and then
Yeah,
I want to just focus real fast on the actual game itself, and then we'll wrap that up.
yeah.
Cy mentioned in our conversation over the weekend, if you haven't seen it, go back and look at the video where we talked to Cy about the Texans game, broke down things. It was a great video. It's, last I checked, we had almost, I think it was over 2,600 views of that video. So check it out. But one of the things he said was, and he mentioned specifically Robinson and Hodgins, about the fact that we might need or might want to have a wide receiver that is a bit different than the rest, has a different body build, a little taller, a little thicker, and that's the Hodgson, that's the Robinson kind of guy. Do you feel, and I'm based on what you said earlier, I'm thinking you don't, but do you feel it necessary that we have somebody who sort of differentiates himself from the rest of the group, or do we make up for that with the tight end group?
I think both. Well, I think we make up with the tight end group in this sense. I think we've got a really big group of tight ends. So Theo Johnson, this is going to really surprise people when people see him in person. He's a big dude, and even the Giant scouts talked about that. But he is. And if they had kept who was the tight end Jackson, if they'd kept him, they really would have had a really tall, big tight end group. Ideally, they want the power forward wide receiver, and who doesn't? But I wouldn't have a guy like that who is just a guy. In other words,
Right.
so much of football on game day is figuring out who's going to be on the inactive list, and you can't have seven and it's oftentimes it's impossible to have six wide receivers active on game day. So you're not gonna inactive unless they're hurt your top four guys, and you're not gonna inactive Miles Boykin, and you're not gonna inactive Isaiah McKenzie, because he's your punt returner, the other guy's your gunner. And so I don't see a spot, even if you had that other guy, where how would you have seven wide receivers active on game day? I just don't see it. So in my mind, you're wasting a roster spot at that point. Ideally, you have the Rome Odunze type of wide receiver on your team, but you can't invent that. And I don't want just, I mean, they've got taller wide receivers on their
Well, Boykin's one
team
of them.
like Robinson and Hodgins, like you just said, but I'm not taking them over Slayton.
Right.
I'm not doing
Right.
that. So
Right. And Miles Boykin, by the way, if he does make the team, if he is, even if he's especially, he's 6'4".
yeah,
He's a big wide receiver.
yeah.
He's just not used at wide receiver very often. I'm kind of with you. Originally, I thought we needed to, but now I'm trying to figure out, well, where would you slot, especially if you believe the Giants want to go down the field. If our plays are going to be a lot more down the field, a lot more yards after catch, then a guy like Hodgins, a guy like Robinson, they're more chain movers based on body size and making the catch and whatever in traffic. And that's not, where do you fit them in? So
Well,
you
and
are.
yeah, and I hate to make it this simple. Again, you can't have seven wide receivers active on game day. You just can't. So
Right,
if
right.
your two of your guys are special teams guys who are going to be active, and the other ones are your top four guys, there's no room for the seventh guy. So you know how earlier we were saying it was moot about I don't forget what we were talking. Oh, cutting Daniel Jones. It's moot because of the salary cap. You can't cut Daniel Jones. To me, it's moot having a seventh wide receiver. Not in terms of, it'd be nice to have him on the roster. It's on game day he can't play because you can't have the seventh guy. In order to have him on, you'd have to make someone inactive that you don't want inactive. You're not going to inactive Wandale Robinson or Neighbors, obviously.
Or McKenzie, who's your
Yeah,
returner,
yeah,
or and
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. You're just not going to do that. So
So let's kind of, I'll mix them in as I can, but let's focus more on the game itself. Let's
okay,
take it from two perspectives. The first one, let's start kind of the opposite. Let's assume the starters don't play.
okay.
Who is it you want to see,
Ah,
that is roster bubble almost, or could cement themselves as maybe I'm the 2 instead of the 3. And I know we're talking quarterback, but kind of give me some of your guys that you want to see that could make a name or could literally play themselves off the roster.
Well, what side of the ball do you want to start
Let's
off on?
start with let's go with offense. Let's start there.
Okay, because I'm bringing up my depth chart right now. So we're assuming that the starters are not going to play. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So I'm going to tell you right now, I think the wide receivers decision has already been made. I really do. Barring it, all these comments are take out injury issues in terms
Sure.
of, or let's
Sure.
assume no one else gets hurt, which knock on wood here. I think the wide receivers has been settled. Um, the question is, at tight end, do they keep 3 or 4? Because we were talking about earlier, is Jacob Johnson now pushing to make this team? And so Jacob Johnson would be some guy I would keep my eye on in an offense in that position, because I think the other guys are there. I think Bellinger's going to be there. I think Manhurts is going to be there, and obviously Theo Johnson's going to be there. You could throw Jack Stoll in there with against the Jacob Johnson thing, but I'm starting to think Jack Stoll's like a practice squad guy.
Kurt. Yep.
So the other big question on the offensive side is, do they keep 4 running backs or 3, and the outsider being potentially Dante Miller? Do they want to hide him now and get him on the practice squad, or do they not want to risk him? Remember what Cy said. If that's your big concern, that he said that was way down on his list of concerns, is who's going to be the 4th running back. So, and the only other thing I'm saying offense, most of my questions are on defense. The only other question I'll have is what kind of game are we going to get out of Lock and DeVito? I mean, that's where I'm at. So I think we know the pecking order on the running backs right now. Tracy's injury kind of, I think, put him number 3 right now. Though I think Tracy was really pushing for, and I still think he is pushing for playing time. But I think we know the top 3 running backs. I think all 3 quarterbacks are going to make it. I think. Again, I wouldn't bet on it, but I think they're going to do that. So that leaves only offensive line. All right. So I mentioned Jacob on Johnson at fullback, but so the real question to me, and you and I talked about this offline a little bit, is Schlottman, and I think that was one of the questions
Yeah.
too.
Joey and VA. Yep.
So before the Houston game, I was leaning towards Kubis making it over Schlottman. Now I'm starting to wonder if Schlottman makes it over Kubis, with Kubis hopefully making it to the practice squad. Kubis had some issues. Kubis clearly needs more time. Let me put it that way.
Sure.
I think
Sure.
he's got a future. The question is, do you risk him on to the waiver wire? And you might not want to do that. But I have a hard time seeing them keeping 10 offensive linemen. I really do. And so right now you've got 10 that you kind of would like to keep across the board. We know who our starters are going to be: Thomas Runyon, Schmitz, Van Roten, and Luminor. And then behind them, I think Izudu is getting better, and I think they want to hold on to him. Kubis is your developmental guy. Schlottman's your veteran center, but Van Roten can play there too. Stinney, I think, has got this team made. And then, of course, Evan Neal. So that's 10. And we talked about this in another video. So is it Kubis or is it Schlottman? And I think that's a big battle right there.
I think positional versatility is going and is key. We talked about this earlier. I think the more you try, and I know I'm going to beat a dead horse, but the more you try to minimize potential areas for Jones. What you don't want is you don't want Jones overthinking. You don't want Jones to be under pressure. You want to make sure you're secure. I think they're going to go, we are very young everywhere. You mentioned that before. The one place we're not young overall, like we're not old, but we're not filled with a bunch of young guys or undrafted guys, and that's the offensive line. Schlottman can play guard if needed, but is a center. Stinney is a guard who could play center. You've got Van Roten is a guard who can play center. Illuminor is a tackle that can play guard. Azudu is a guard that is currently playing tackle but can play guard. So you've got all this versatility with guys. I think you're right. I thought Kubis was going to make it after what I saw before, but now it's kind of like he's a guy, and I can't believe this. Don't be surprised if he comes up with a hamstring or a sprained ankle. If they think he'll get snagged trying to get him to the practice squad and they don't want to lose him, they'll IR him with a mysterious tiny little injury that he picked up here in the last week of camp.
And they used to do that all the time. It's harder to do now, but again, that would be, if he gets dinged up, and people are like, maybe don't get too upset about that. Too
Right.
upset about
That
that
might be
line.
intentional to not lose them because you just don't want to. It depends on how much the Giants really are, what the management and ownership is thinking of this season, what their expectations are beyond what they tell people out in public. And then, because if their expectations are, I want to see more like 22, that this year needs to be more like 22, then we're going to go full veteran offensive line. We're going to do everything possible to keep Jones upright and hope that he doesn't make a bunch of mistakes.
Yeah.
So you hit a lot of the running back. I think you'll see a bunch of the guys that are not making the team because I don't think we're going to risk Tracy too much. I don't
Or
think
Miller.
or Miller because of the hammy. You give it a little bit longer to rest. So I think you'll see Kelly, Lindland,
Lingard.
yeah,
Lingard.
Lingard, the other guy.
And they
Um,
may want to be hiding Miller. They may want to hide Miller too.
that, very true, very true. So, quarterback, real quick. If Jones doesn't play at all, and that's the theory in this scenario, who do you play first, DeVito or Locke?
I think it's already Locke. Locke was back with the number 2 team today. So I think Locke's playing 2. And I think that's the pecking order right now. So like I said, I think DeVito blew a chance against Houston. I think I, he probably never really had a chance to move up, but if he did, I think he had to play well against Houston. I thought that was a missed opportunity for him.
So do you think the Giants play Locke only a little bit and
No,
let
I think that, well, it depends on if Daniel Jones plays. So
well, see, I'm thinking I'm in this scenario.
if Daniel Jones plays, we may not see DeVito.
Well,
They may spend the rest of the game on lock.
that's where I was going in the other direction. Let's assume Jones doesn't play. And if you're trying to decide if I'm going 2 or 3, do I let Locke play and possibly get hurt? If I know he's my number 2, do I let him play very long, or do I just play him a series or 2, pull him out, and let DeVito play the rest because I know I'm going to try to just stash him on the practice squad?
Well, you can do that too, but the other question too is you got to get Locke ready in case something happens to Daniel, and Locke hasn't done anything yet. So part of
True.
me would be kind of like, we got to get Locke ready. So if Daniel gets knocked out of the game against the Vikings, Locke's got to come in. I'm not real comfortable right now, given the fact that Locke's been missing time, and the last time he played, it wasn't so hot. So I could go either way.
Are
Yours way makes a lot of sense too. So I wouldn't be surprised with either.
are
And
you
then, of
sold on
course, we don't know how healthy Locke still is. He's got
Well,
the
that's
leak.
good point.
So they may not say we want to play. We may not want to play him simply because he's hurt.
Are you sold on 3 quarterbacks or 2?
I think they're going. I'm not sold. I am not sold. But Brandon Brown today did say, when somebody mentioned Locke and Daniel, he said, "Don't forget DeVito." So, which suggests to me, I think it ultimately comes down is, what do they really think about Tommy DeVito? Do they really think he has a future or not? And I think the cut down day is going to tell us. I would not bet any significant amount of money on either way. I wouldn't bet on him making the team. I wouldn't bet on him being off the team. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if you have an opinion. I don't know.
Well, that's a good question. I've been wondering what would happen if the Giants felt like they had to have 3 quarterbacks, but aren't necessarily 100% sold on DeVito. If someone else were to get released across the league, would they possibly go grab that guy and let DeVito go and say, well, I'm more
Sure,
comfortable?
sure.
Because I don't think DeVito's guaranteed, even if he's the 3rd best quarterback and they want 3, I'm not sure that they're sold that he's the guy. But I'm also not sold that he's not any less than Locke. So that's the weird. That's the quarterback hell that you keep talking about.
Yeah.
The level of talent from top to bottom is not that. I mean, Jones has all the physical traits of who should be a really good quarterback. He just doesn't seem to put them to use on the field consistently or in a way you can count on. Locke is a
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, you're fine. Go
The
ahead.
only way that I think if I'm Eric Kennedy is the general manager of the team, the only way I keep DeVito right now is if I think there is a decent chance he could be the number 2 or starting quarterback on the 2025 team. So the pie in the sky thing is the starting quarterback in terms
Right.
of he's our fallback because he's the only guy of the three that's under contract. Well, Jones is, but we know that
Yeah.
he's gone. So if he doesn't perform, so Locke's only under a 1 year deal. So right now, if he was to make the roster, DeVito's the only one who's going to be he's under a contract next year. The pie in the sky thing would be he's the Cinderella man and he's your future quarterback. Is that going to happen? Probably not. But he could also be a very inexpensive number 2 guy if you think he can do that. Those are the only scenarios where I keep him. If you don't think he has a chance at either, the first being far less likely, then why are you keeping him? So if you don't really think
Right.
there's a shot, then why are you wasting a roster spot on him? So if they think he's just a guy and he's a nice story, then cut him. And then because if he's not the answer, then just move on at this point.
Sure. So
Yeah.
then on the other side of the ball, so we'll try to tighten
Yeah.
this up. Who are you looking to see again? Let's just go with the assumption that this for now the starters aren't playing.
Yeah, this is
Um,
the tougher side. I mean, there's a lot going on here. So, and I'm going to throw some things out that are going to surprise people. So I think DJ Davidson is in direct competition with Jordan Riley at this point. They could both make it. But I could also see it was very telling to me. I said it in the Cy interview. It was telling to me that Riley was playing so late in that game and Davidson was playing in front of him.
right.
So if they were trying to find roster spots, I would not be 100% sure that Jordan Riley makes his team. So I think it's a really important game for Jordan Riley. Elijah Chapman, I think, has made this team, but obviously you want him to still see him play well. And then the question here is a numbers game. So we know Dexter Lawrence is going to make it. We know Nunez Roches is going to make it. I think Davidson's going to make it over Riley. So the question is, do they keep 5 here? I originally thought 6, but I don't think they're going to keep 6 now unless they pick up somebody off a waiver. So right now on the defensive side up front, I think this is a really, really big game for Riley. I think guys like Casey Rogers, their best chance is the practice squad.
Yep.
And then the guys that are really playing for their future here is an outside linebacker behind the main guys. I think Ojulari will make it just by default, but if somebody else shakes free, Boogie Basham again. I mean, these guys, all these guys, these Whitley's, Tamon Fox, we've seen
There's
nothing from
nothing. Yeah.
preseason. This is actually this is going to be Darian Beaver's last hurrah. I think he's gone
Yeah.
anyway, but this is his last hurrah. I think Darius Musa has a chance to really, because he's going to get a lot of snaps with all the other injuries. Carter Coughlin has a chance to make a statement here because I assume he's going to play.
And
You
he's
know,
a good special teamer too.
and he's
So
a good special
yeah.
teamer, so that's a big game for him. And then lastly, because we're going to try to keep this short, is my goodness, there's a mess at cornerback. I mean, who do you keep and who do you let go? Is Trey Hawkins even safe at this place? I mean, do you keep one of these veterans like Long and Trey Herndon? Obviously Banks is going to make it. I think Flott's going to make it. I think and they like McLeod enough he's going to make it. But and Phillips is going to make it. But you and I have already talked in the previous video. I'd be shocked if another corner isn't added to this team by the time the season starts. I really would. I'd be shocked if we don't have a corner that's not even on this roster at this point.
Yeah. And we're talking shock, like not added via trade or free agency. One of those two things is
Yeah.
probably going to happen. Somebody got cut, we picked them up, or we traded for somebody. The other thing too that I would say, boy, you look at the edge pieces, and Basham's played better, but again, he's limited. He's extremely limited on what he can do. Ojulari, I don't know what happened to him from and Cy mentioned it and I forgot about it. He did come out with a bit of a knee to begin with, which is why he dropped somewhat in the draft. He has bulked up since we brought him on board. He's a bigger dude now. And once you start having lower body injuries, and it's not just the knee, he's had the calf, he's had an ankle. When you start having that, it becomes very hard to not have those things. And it looks like some of his explosion, his lateral quickness just isn't there. He's a power guy now. He can power rush, but I don't know that he's going to be beating guys around the corner the way he did when he was first came into the team. So we might look edge. I'm curious to see. Cut down's going to be very interesting. So why don't you real quick, Eric, kind of, I mean, we talked about it in the other video, you got some travel pieces coming up, but let's lay out a little bit of what we're looking at. We've got the game coming up on, is it Friday or Saturday? I'm trying to remember. I think it's
Oh, is
Friday.
it Saturday? I think it's Saturday. Wait
Is
a
it
minute.
Saturday? I'm trying
Yeah,
to remember.
I should. Isn't that the kind of thing I should know?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to
It's funny.
remember.
I'm so focused on the next day that sometimes I don't even know what, because my wife all the time asks me, "Well, when are they playing?" I'm like, I have no
Yeah,
idea.
they spread the games out these last ones on this last week because
It's
of
on
the.
Saturday,
It's
so
on
it's
Saturday.
Saturday at 7:30. So it looks like it's on the NFL Network. So yeah, so they have the joint practice. So we're recording this now Tuesday night. They have the joint practice on Wednesday, and then they're going to have the game on Saturday. So and then the one thing I want to throw out before we talk about the schedule
Sure.
too, just to finish up, is if they don't play the starters or they don't play them long, there is a point in this game because the Giants are nicked up at a number of positions here. Not serious season-ending things, but things where they do want to start getting some bodies back. Don't, and I mentioned this again with Houston, and they actually did it surprisingly early in Houston. Don't freak out with some of the backups in the game. One of my pet peeves, and it's going to be like this to the day I die, is hearing fans bitch about backups who aren't going to make the team. And we saw that against Houston, where there were guys like Breon Borders in the game in the second quarter. And I'm like, you see something like, well, our backup defensive backs stink. Well, they may stink, but the guy you're talking about is not even going to be on the roster. So when the Jets game, if we're not playing our starters, and there's only so many bodies that they can play if you're not playing your starters. So just take it with a grain of salt who's in the game. Like most of our inside linebackers are hurt right now.
Right.
So remember that when you watch the game. And same thing with other positions, that when you look at it, so if the player gets burned or has a bad play, think to yourself first, go, well, was this a guy that was going to make the roster in the first place? And if it wasn't, don't get bent out of shape over it. Now, on the other hand, if it's somebody who you really were counting on, then get bent out of shape over it. So
Yeah.
I just want to throw that out there.
And keep in mind too, just because it's not the starters doesn't necessarily mean it's the frontline backups either. Some of those
Right.
guys, they're going to be like, he's a little ding, so we don't want to play him at all. We might not see Phillips play because you don't want to, he was nicked and we don't know if he's going to play and want to get him hurt. He's going to be an integral part of the defense going forward. A young
Andrew
guy.
Phillips is a perfect example. I'm glad you hit. I mean, so you want him to get experience, but he's got an ankle, and his presence changes the defense, because if he's not in there, and then Isaiah Simmons is in there, and you saw what happened to
Yeah.
him against Houston. So he's a perfect guy to bring up.
And it's again, people get wrapped up too much in the what happened positive, what happened negative, and whatever. If you wanted it to be positive and you see some positives, you think it's the greatest thing in the world. David Sills, Bowman, I mean, come on, we saw it all the time. And then you see the negative stuff. Beaver's negative stuff last week, though, a lot of it was individual play. It's not because other people weren't picking up and he was trying to cover and he was just out of position. He missed tackles. He
Yeah,
looked just he if it's not for
bad
injuries,
angles, the whole
if
thing. Yeah.
yeah, if it's not for injuries, I don't think we're even discussing whether he could make the team. And we're still saying that I think he played himself off the team last week.
Yeah, and that's what you need to look for, are the bubble players like a Beavers. Does he play himself on or off the team? That's what you look for. So like a Jordan Riley I mentioned earlier. I think this is a really big game for Jordan Riley. I really do. Um, those are the guys that I pay attention to. I don't pay attention. I got to look at the roster here, but I don't pay attention like to the third string offensive tackle, or I don't pay. I mean, I do, but I don't, because I look at the practice squad type stuff. But I just don't lose a lot of sleep if we're talking about I'll give you another example here. Let's see, like when we're talking about the wide receivers, if somebody's out there, like people were getting mad that John Giles fumbled last week. I'm like, again, he may make it to the practice squad, but I'm not losing sleep over if John Giles makes a mistake. It's that kind of thing that drives me nuts, where people say, "Well, our backups stink." Well, that's
Right.
that's what I'm talking about. So
So let's
yeah,
let's kind of pull it together this way. Uh, three players, they aside from starters, let's again just stick to the assumption they're not playing.
yeah.
Three players that you would like to see in the game and actually do something for whatever reason. Maybe it's a guy you just want to see if he's enough to make the practice squad. Doesn't matter. Just three guys that you're kind of hoping to see.
The first one's going to sound lazy, but and because everyone's talking about them right now, and I think they're getting a little too ahead of themselves. But I really want to see what they have in Elijah Chapman. So
Yeah.
he has done some things. Everyone's talking about that play. That's not the kind of play that, I mean, that's a fantastic play. Don't get me wrong, and it's an all hustle play. But you want to see him beat a guard and get to the quarterback, or cause a holding penalty like he did last week. I want to see Elijah Chapman again. He's going to be one of the guys that I'm really going to be focused on. Um, I like this kid Darius Muasau. I know he's
Yeah.
small, size completely correct. He doesn't have ideal outside, range getting to the outside, but he's a guy I think is going to play a ton because he's going to have to, and so I think he's going to be fun to watch. I'm going to stay on the defensive side of the ball. It's going to be boring. I think Tyler Nubin is making his push to be the starter, and so I think I don't know how much he'll play. I assume he'll play more, um, but I think Tyler Nubin. And the only reason I'm not throwing a corner back in there is, again, I think our corner's not on the roster. I think our corner's on
Well,
the
right.
roster right now.
And
So you
and
can
and,
say
and
all the corner. You could say all the corners. I'm going to give and I'm going to give since I didn't do offensive all, I'm
honorable
going to do
mention.
it. I'm going to honorable mention. Uh, well, this is a lazy one too. Um,
You're gonna take my
Drew
guy.
Lock,
Oh, okay.
because he was terrible the only time he played. I'm curious. Is he really that bad? I mean, is Drew Lock really that bad?
Right.
That's what I'm curious about.
So, one thing I'll say about Nubin, because we were saying let's assume the starters don't play.
Yeah,
Safety,
he might be a
but
starter.
but but safety, you might not have an option.
Yeah.
I mean, we literally have guys that we just pulled off the street that you might have to throw out there because you can't sit Pinnock and Nubin and then what? So now you got Belton, who is kind of a starter. He very well could be. And then who? They can't play the whole game. So I suspect some starters might have to play just because the people behind them are so thin, you don't have a
Yeah, and
choice.
I don't know if Javarius Owens is healthy enough to practice, because there was conflicting stuff. Some of the reporters today were tweeting that he was out, but then I read the transcript from Dable, and Dable said he was going to do some things in practice today. So if he plays, he's another guy. If Newman doesn't play, Javarius Owens is a guy that I'd be curious to see. But I'm looking at the off. See, part of this gets back to, and I want to hear your thoughts. Part of
Sure.
this gets back to, I think the offense is a lot more set than the defense in terms of who we know who the starters and role players are. We know who the wide receivers are going to be. We largely know who the tight ends are going to be. We largely know who the running backs are going to be. The offensive linemen. I think that's set more. So when you ask me who are you keeping an eye on, it's the positions that I think are a little more in flux. So that's why I mentioned the Nubins and the Chapmans and those types of players, and the Muasals, because Muasal could start on opening day depending on when McFadden is because Deontay Johnson's out for a while. So I mean, Carter Coughlin is. Do you want him to start? I don't know who our start. This was a question. I don't know who our starting inside linebacker is on opening day right now. I mean, is McFadden
Right.
back by then? I don't know. I don't know. So
Um, yeah, speaking of lazy, I'm gonna go that route. I want to see Evan Neal. He's not a starter.
oh
He's got to get some gameplay.
oh
Get him in there. He's got to do something. I want to see what he can do. Miles Boykin, we've talked about him a lot, but here's the thing. I kind of want to see him, but here's another thing that scares me if I do see him. If I see him out there at wide receiver, that might be a good sign that the Giants are trying to see what they can get out of him at wide receiver if it's needed. If he's the sixth, let's say, wide receiver, and I get injuries, what can he do? If I don't see him at wide receiver, then I'm beginning to wonder, is he on this team? Did they decide that we can't, his special teams play isn't enough to put him in as one of the receivers? If Allen Robinson's out there playing, starting right off, playing early, and then comes out, that might not be a bad sign for him. If he's out there in the third and fourth quarter, that's a bad sign for Allen Robinson.
Yeah.
The other guy, I want to see Rodgers on the defensive line. I'm 100% with you. I think he goes to the practice squad. But if he can show enough there, that gives me hope that if we have to pull him off the practice squad, we got a guy that can play. I like him. And then the other thing is just, it's not really a person individually. It's who behind. I mean, we're going to start some people at edge. It better not be Burns and it better not be Thibodeau if we don't play the starters. So of those backup edge guys, which one does something that says he's good enough to keep? Yeah.
Anything. Because, I mean, if they don't, then do we get rid of all of those guys and just pick up other people from other teams? So, but let's wrap this up. I actually just got the look from my wife that said, you guys have been on.
She's like, wrap it up. We did.
And she's right. So I think that's a good stopping point. So I think, yeah, I think I agree with all your points that you just made. I'm kicking myself for not saying Evan Neal. I mean, but that shows you how much better the offensive line has gotten. That he didn't immediately come to mind to me. Evan Neal,
right?
And Schmitz too.
And the other guy too. Cy mentioned him, so I do want to include him. Azudu might be battling Nelson. We just haven't seen a lot from Nelson, but Nelson's a guy who could beat him out as the tackle because he can play.
It would surprise me. Nelson's been playing so late, and I haven't been impressed with him. I think the bigger question is who's the swing tackle? Is it Azudu or Neal? I think that's the bigger question.
I mean, it'd have to be Neal.
I don't think it has to be anybody.
Could you? So real quick, if something happened to Thomas, could Illuminor play left tackle and Neal come in right tackle, or do you think it has to be Azudu because Neal can't play left tackle?
No, I think my gut tells me they would shift Illuminor because he's the veteran who has played it before,
right?
And they have not been able to practice at left tackle, and they don't want to mess with him even more. I think they could play Neal over there, but I think you're playing with fire at that point. So some people will say, well, why mess with two positions? Left tackle is kind of a category of its own. You don't want your left tackle to be your weak spot. So
that's we saw that.
So the question is then too or do you have Azudu who has been practicing and playing at left tackle? Do you have him be your left tackle and leave Illuminor at right tackle? That's where it gets interesting.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so we got a lot to shake out. You're going to be traveling, doing a bunch of things. Congratulations to your son on coming out. It's
the first of two graduations. So when they're in the Army, they have turning green, and then in November they'll have turning blue. So there's two graduations. So this is the first of two.
Nice.
So. Yeah.
So we'll get caught up again next week. Coming up in the very near future, Colin Lindsay's going to be on. We have talked to a couple other people who have other Giant shows. They've agreed to come on, so we'll be doing stuff like that. We've got some surprises. I really wanted to tell you who one of them is, but I can't yet till I know for sure the date.
Yeah.
So
no, I would recommend not jinxing it.
because it would. Yeah, nobody wants to go down with that ship. So overall though, Eric, best travels. I might recap the game if I find time to do a quick one, but we'll be talking next week when you get back. So again, like, subscribe, please. Really appreciate it. Comment, and we look forward to talking to you again on Inside BBI with John and Eric. Thanks for watching, and have a good night.